Deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, an elderly billionaire steps off a floatplane into a world untouched by mercy. He carries no weapons, no survival gear, and no bodyguard, only a brilliant photographic mind that remembers every single word from every book he has ever read. Charles Morse lives in a world defined by extreme wealth, but his quiet nature isolates him from everyone around him. He arrives at a remote mountain lodge alongside his much younger wife Mickey, a world-famous model, and her entourage of photographers led by Robert Greene. Charles is not a man who displays his intelligence loudly. While others drink, Charles wanders over to the lodge's bookshelf, recognizing rare volumes on survival. When the lodge owner challenges him to identify an ancient Indian paddle hanging above the fireplace, Charles correctly describes the traditional salmon smoking symbol carved into the wood, explaining that he read about it in a historical text years ago. But despite his vast library of theoretical knowledge, Charles admits that theory means nothing until it is tested in the real world. Before the group turns in for the night, the lodge owner offers a stern warning. The surrounding wilderness is home to the Kodiak bear, the largest land predator on Earth, a giant weighing over 1,300 pounds that stands nearly 10 feet tall. He warns them never to leave food exposed or doors unlocked, because once a Kodiak catches the scent of human meal, it will hunt relentlessly until it gets what it wants. Later that evening, Mickey asks Charles for a midnight snack. As Charles walks down to the dark lodge kitchen, he notices the back door hanging wide open into the freezing night air. Before he can react, a shadowy figure lunges from the dark, startling Charles. But the terror turns into laughter as the lights flip on, revealing a surprise birthday party. Robert presents a handsome gift, a heavy hunting pocket knife, while Mickey presents an engraved gold pocket watch. Charles smiles and thanks them both, but behind his calm demeanor, his sharp eyes catch a quiet exchange of glances between Robert and Mickey, confirming a suspicion he has carried for months. The next morning, Robert leads a photo shoot along the riverbank. Robert is a successful commercial photographer, but his ambition exceeds his talent, and his jealousy toward Charles's wealth festers beneath a mask of friendship. When his secondary model fails to show up, Robert learns that a rugged local hunter lives in a cabin 80 miles north across the mountain range. Mickey encourages Charles to join Robert and his assistant Stephen on a flight to recruit the hunter, suggesting that a trip into the wilderness will do him better than sitting inside reading books. Charles accepts, stepping into a small floatplane alongside Robert, Stephen, and a veteran bush pilot. They fly across endless expanses of pine forest and frozen lakes, landing near the hunter's isolated cabin. But when they reach the front door, they find a handwritten note pinned to the wood, stating that the hunter has gone deep into the mountains for a multi-day hunt. Rather than return empty-handed, Robert convinces the pilot to fly further north to search for the hunter's campfire. As the floatplane cruises low over a vast alpine lake, disaster strikes without warning. A massive flock of migrating geese rises suddenly from the trees, slamming into the cockpit windshield and jamming the engine propeller. The plane loses all lift, spiraling violently out of the sky and crashing at high speed into the frigid lake. Water floods the cabin in seconds. The pilot is killed on impact, pinned beneath the instrument panel. But Charles, Robert, and Stephen scramble through the shattered fuselage, swimming through ice-cold water to reach the desolate shore. Soaking wet in sub-zero temperatures, hypothermia threatens to kill them within minutes. Robert's hands tremble violently as he reaches into his jacket pocket, pulling out a dry box of wooden matches. With shaking fingers, Charles gathers dry tinder and builds a small fire, saving their lives before the freezing wind can lock their joints. The next morning, reality settles over the three survivors. They are stranded hundreds of miles away from their planned flight path, with no food or emergency transmitter. Robert has taken the hunter's note from the cabin door, meaning search parties will have no idea where to look. Charles calculates their options, realizing that sitting by the lake waiting for rescue is a slow death sentence. Their only chance is to walk south toward the hunter's cabin. Without a compass or GPS, Charles calls upon his photographic memory, remembering an ancient survival technique. He takes a metal paperclip from his pocket, straightens the wire, and rubs it against his silk shirt to create a weak magnetic charge. He places the wire carefully onto a floating leaf in a calm puddle of water. As the leaf rotates, the wire aligns itself precisely with magnetic north, determining their direction of travel. They set out on foot, trekking across steep ridges, icy streams, and dense thickets. As they march, Charles decides to address the elephant in the room. He turns to Robert, asking him directly if he has been sleeping with Mickey. Robert pauses, thrown off by Charles's bluntness, before breaking into a nervous laugh. He brushes the question off as a joke, sarcastically replying that if he were sleeping with Mickey, this would be the perfect opportunity to kill Charles in the woods and claim his fortune. Robert insists he has a girlfriend back in the city, but Charles recognizes the sharp edge of truth hidden inside the joke. Their conversation is cut short by a low, guttural roar echoing through the trees. Stephen stops dead in his tracks, pointing toward the ridge above. Emerging from the shadows is a massive Kodiak bear, its fur matted, its shoulders hunched in aggressive posture. The giant predator has caught their scent, and it begins descending the slope toward them. Panicked, the three men turn and run, scrambling down a rocky embankment toward a roaring river. With the bear closing in, Charles spots a fallen pine tree stretching across the rapids. He ushers Stephen and Robert across first, but as Charles steps onto the slippery log, the bear reaches the riverbank, shaking the tree violently. Charles slips into the freezing torrent, but Robert reaches down from the far bank, grabbing Charles's jacket and hauling him to safety just before the current sweeps him away. They press deeper into the mountains, hiking until darkness falls. They build another fire, but their hopes shatter the following morning when they reach a cliff edge, looking down to realize they have walked in a complete circle, returning to the exact spot where they started 24 hours earlier. The paperclip compass failed due to local iron ore deposits in the rock. Demoralized and starving, Stephen begins to break down. He sits on a fallen log, attempting to carve a wooden spear with his pocket knife. But his trembling hands slip, driving the sharp blade deep into his thigh. Blood gushes from the wound, soaking through his trousers. Charles and Robert bandage the leg, but Stephen can no longer walk without support. That evening, as rain pours over their meager campsite, Charles spots a piece of bloody cloth hanging from a low tree branch. He realizes with horror that Stephen threw his blood-stained pants onto the branch instead of burying them. Before Charles can react, a deafening roar shatters the night. The Kodiak bear bursts into the camp, drawn by the scent of fresh blood. The massive beast lunges directly at Stephen's tent, dragging the screaming young man out into the dark. Charles grabs a burning branch, charging forward to fight off the monster, but the bear swats him aside, devouring Stephen in the shadows before disappearing into the forest. The next morning, the rain turns to heavy snow. Charles and Robert stand alone in the frozen landscape, freezing, exhausted, and hunted. They continue walking, but the Kodiak bear is no longer just hunting for food. It tracks them through the snow, circling their position like a relentless ghost. While attempting to catch a squirrel with a string trap, Charles hears the thundering sound of a rescue helicopter. They scramble into an open clearing, waving their arms and shouting at the sky. But the helicopter is too high, scanning the wrong ridge. The aircraft flies away into the clouds, leaving them in crushing silence. Robert collapses into the snow, completely broken. He mutters that they are dead men, that no human can survive against a monster that never sleeps. Charles kneels beside him, grabbing Robert by the shoulders and staring into his eyes. He speaks with intense authority, reciting a mantra on human endurance. What one man can do, another can do. He makes Robert repeat the words aloud, forcing energy back into his freezing body. What one man can do, another can do. Charles looks out at the snow-covered forest, realizing a fundamental truth. Running from the bear will only result in their deaths. Therefore, they must stop running and become the hunters. Using their pocket knives. Charles and Robert shape heavy pine branches into razor-sharp spears. Charles cuts his own arm, smearing fresh blood over a rock in a narrow gorge to draw the beast into a bottleneck trap. As dusk approaches, the thud of footsteps announces the bear's arrival. The Kodiak steps into the gorge, sniffing the blood before locking its dark eyes onto the two men. Charles and Robert brace their spears against the earth, holding their ground as the 1,300-pound monster charges. The bear leaps, slamming its weight onto Robert and crushing his spear. Charles steps directly into the monster's path, holding his spear firmly against a heavy boulder. As the Kodiak rears up to crush him, Charles lunges forward, driving the sharpened wooden point deep into the creature's chest. The bear roars in agony, thrashing as its massive body collapses over the spear, driving the point deeper into its heart. The giant monster rolls onto its side, gasping, before going completely still. Charles stands over the fallen behemoth, breathless, bloodied, but alive. Over the next 2 days, they skin the bear, using its thick pelt as a warm coat and roasting its meat over a fire to regain strength. Using his watch hands as a crude solar compass, Charles determines the true direction of south, and they resume their march. By afternoon, they break through a dense tree line, finding an abandoned hunter's cabin sitting beside a wide river. Inside, they discover survival gear, canned food, rifle ammunition, a topographical map, and a sturdy wooden canoe stored beneath the porch. While Robert rests inside, Charles searches through the cabin drawers for supplies. He discovers a small wooden box belonging to Robert. Inside is a store receipt for an engraved hunting knife, accompanied by a handwritten note from Mickey expressing her passionate love for Robert. The truth is laid bare. The affair was real, and Robert had planned to replace Charles all along. Robert steps into the cabin holding a loaded hunting rifle. The mask of friendship is completely gone. With no witnesses left alive, Robert realizes he can shoot Charles, claim the plane crash killed him, and return home to inherit Charles's empire and wife. Charles looks at his friend with quiet pity, making no attempt to plead for his life. He simply tells Robert to do what he has to do. Robert raises the rifle, taking aim at Charles's chest. But as he steps backward to clear his sightline, his foot steps onto a concealed bear trap pit on the cabin floor. The wooden boards collapse, sending Robert plunging 10 feet into a dark pit lined with sharp wooden stakes. A sharp stake pierces Robert's leg, severing a major artery. He screams in agony, trapped at the bottom of the pit. Charles does not walk away. He lowers a heavy rope, hauling the bleeding man out of the pit, bandaging his leg with clean cloth, and carrying him down to the riverbank. He places Robert gently inside the wooden canoe, taking the oars and paddling downstream towards civilization. As the canoe drifts down the river, Robert grows pale, losing blood rapidly from his severed artery. He looks up at Charles, overwhelmed by guilt and the nobility of the man he tried to murder. With his dying breath, Robert whispers a sincere apology, confessing his betrayal and admitting that Charles is a far better man than he could ever be. Robert closes his eyes and passes away quietly in the canoe as the sound of a distant helicopter engine echoes overhead. Charles ignites a smoke signal flare from the canoe. The rescue helicopter spots the orange smoke, banking sharply and landing beside the riverbank. Hours later, a rescue team brings Charles back to the main lodge. A crowd of reporters, police officers, and lodge guests surrounds the entrance. Mickey stands among them, her face pale with shock as she sees her husband walk out of the helicopter alive. Charles walks up to Mickey, holding out his hand. He places Robert's engraved pocket watch into her palm, looking into her eyes with quiet, dignified understanding. Mickey looks down at the watch, realizing in an instant that Charles knows everything, and that his silence is a far heavier burden than any accusation. Reporters rush forward with microphones, asking Charles how his companions died in the wilderness. Charles looks out over the crowd, his voice calm, steady, and devoid of malice. "They died," Charles says quietly, "saving my life." He turns, walking into the lodge with unshakable dignity, a man who survived the wilderness, defeated the monster, and conquered his own soul.